Finance Committee meeting to order, and just would make note that the meeting is being recorded. And I would ask that our committee coordinator, Ms. Mimi Harvey, please call the roll.
Broughton. Seleg.
Here.
Soel.
Present.
Tony.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Very good. Next on the agenda is a call for public comment. And I think rather than sort of recite everything I need to recite relative to public comment first, why don't I at least ask if there is anybody that if we see anyone wishing to address the Finance Committee during the public comment period.
Trustee Soel, this is Louisa. I can let you know that there's nobody here in person wishing to address the committee.
Is anybody that might want to raise their hand through the Zoom function that might be online attempting to try to address the committee?
Trustee Soel, I do see one hand raised. We have Todd Hill.
Very good. Mr. Hill, you're going to have a few minutes to address the Finance Committee. I do know you also took some time to address the Executive Committee a little bit earlier during the public comment period, and so look forward to your public comment. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Soel. I do appreciate the opportunity to take this time to speak. Unfortunately, I think that because my issues have persisted for such a period of time and they're so broad, it does a disservice to actually try to speak to them in this particular format. I have put my issues in writing and my thoughts. I've got signed affidavits that I've submitted to the board prior and submitted to the actors prior as well for the state. Those have not been released to public comment, even though under both guideline and statute, they are to be. It has exceeded the time frame that any reasonable hold would take, and none of the statements that I've made have been actually denied, refuted. So the reality is there's no cause for thinking that it's defamatory, because it's been over, in some cases, 24 months since the allegations have been made. So from my perspective, I have asked many people in the state to assist me in a simple, amicable resolution. And instead, it has sort of taken a small little weed and allowed it to blossom and flower into something that looks really like a tree and maybe a forest now. So again, I know I've been circumspect. I've done that out of respect for the time of the recording here. I do not expect that the board would admit to its prior knowledge of this, even though, again, as I stated in writing, the standard is new or should have known. And so from my perspective, I've missed the pertinent meeting opportunities, for example, the discipline committee and those things that are directly related to that. I do have one comment that may be actually appropriate really for public comment related to the Finance Committee. And that is the notion that perhaps certain kinds of spend are wasteful. For example, some staffers make more than the President of the United States, much more than the President of the United States.
You have
And
30
it
seconds.
baffles me. I'm not complaining, it's publicly recorded. I'm not saying that reality is that it hasn't been negotiated appropriately. All I'm really saying is, why? What would it be the case? Why would it be the case that we need to pay an attorney who, quite frankly, it boggles the mind what special knowledge they could have that would make it worth them being
Sorry, your
paid
time is
that
up.
much? It seems
Mr. Hill, your time has expired, but I do want to make sure that on behalf of this committee that you do know that we appreciate your comments, and I would commend to the board team as appropriate to please respond accordingly to the comments that Mr. Hill has raised. It sounds like he may have found himself in sort of the wrong form in terms of the finance committee and maybe meant to be in the regulation and discipline committee. But anyway, you've been heard, Mr. Hill, and we'll move forward with the agenda. I think next on the agenda is the chair's report. I really don't have much of a report today other than to say that our finance committee meeting should be relatively brief. We have a couple of action items that should be relatively brief, but I did want to provide or allow our chief financial officer, Ms. Araceli Montoya Chico, to provide a brief sort of informational sort of overview of where we are relative to an issue that has come before us a couple of times before and will come back here relatively soon on the fee analysis. And so, Ms. Montoya Chico, if you wouldn't mind just sort of updating the finance committee members as to where we stand.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. I wanted to provide this committee a quick update on where we are with our fee analysis. In prior board meetings, I had said that we would bring forth at the September board meeting our final proposal for the fee increases. As you can see in the agenda item, it's not included in here. But I do want to say my team has worked very diligently and spent a lot of time taking your feedback in the prior board meetings on the fee analysis. So just a reminder, we've looked at all of the program fees for admissions, the Office of Professional Competence, and the Office of Attorney Regulation and Consumer Resources. We have worked in collaboration with those offices to come up with what we think our final proposal of the fees are going to be. As a result, we went back with to OGC, and some of the fees included are, I think you guys know, are going to be politically sensitive. Some of the fee proposals that we're hoping to do are going to be pretty significant. So before bringing that final proposal to you, we went back to OGC and we decided that there is a need for OGC to go back and look at every single program fee to determine our compliance, to determine that our fees that we want to increase are in compliance with the rules of each program fee, to make sure that they review the legality of what we're allowed to do and what we might not be allowed to do. And depending on what OGC comes back with, we may need to further revise some of those fees some more. We did factor in, consider what the fee increases will be, charging those who can pay more. So for example, attorneys might get charged more for certain fees than law students, corporations, where we can't charge corporations more than nonprofits. We have factored all of that into our fee proposal. And OGC obviously is pretty busy. I think it was about 15 program fees that they're going to have to review for us. And with a lot of the turnover they have, it's going to take a while for them to get through all of the program fees from the legal perspective. And while I hope that maybe by November we will have something back to this committee, what might be more realistic is to bring it back at the January board meeting with what is going to be the final fee proposal, the increase proposal.
Very good. Any questions from committee members on this informational sort of update that Ms. Montoya Chica just provided? Mr. Tony, do I see your hand?
Yes, I'm not sure
Please.
the best way to raise it, but yes.
Yes, thank you.
Chair Soul. I guess my only comment here is I understand very good reasons why the fee proposal is not before us today. And I also understand that this needs to be reviewed not just by the staff that worked with the CFO, but with the staff that works with the general counsel to make sure that all of the proposals are in compliance with the rules and regulations. I understand that. I would still like to have an expectation that we see something in November. because it's an important component of the budget. We have a budget year now in which we experience a deficit. We're projecting a deficit. And I think that, I know part of my goal as part of the Finance Committee is to do whatever we can to avoid that in 2023. In other words, that in 2023, I want to be able to approve a balanced budget and not a deficit budget. So I would like any encouragement we can give, not just for the finance team, but for the legal team to really work hard, do what they can to present us something for discussion. This is the kind of thing that, because it's going to be major changes, there's value to having a meeting where it's discussed before it's adopted. And in January, we're really going to be needing to adopt a budget in January. That's the start of our fiscal year. So that I just want to make that encouragement. And if for some reason it's not ready for the November meeting, then I would encourage you as chair to hold a special Finance Committee meeting in December so that we can review at least a draft of the proposal. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Very good, Mr. Tony, and duly noted. And Ms. Montoya Chico, I would just, in echoing Mr. Tony's comments, just endeavor your team as well as the legal team to move as expeditiously as you possibly can. And I think that a discussion item in November and possibly an action item in December through some sort of special Finance Committee meeting, if needed, could be one of the ways to go on this whole thing. So appreciate getting the update in terms of where it is that you are, and understand, how many fees that have to go through and have to be analyzed. So just appreciate the workload. And so let's see where we end up. Okay, just keep us posted.
We'll aim for that. We'll try.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Any other questions from Finance Committee members on the fee overview? Seeing none, I think we'll move forward. Next is the consent calendar. Ask if there's any members of Finance Committee that would like to pull anything off the consent calendar. Seeing none. Ms. Harvey, well, can I ask for a motion to approve the consent calendar, please?
I move to approve consent calendar.
Get a second?
Second.
All right. Moved by Tony, second by Seleg. Ms. Harvey, would you call the roll?
Rotten, Seleg, Seleg,
I have a technology problem. Yes, sorry,
Okay.
the mic is too far away.
thank you. Tony,
Aye.
motion carries.
All right. Next item on the agenda are the minutes of our July 21st, 2022 meeting, our open session minute. There are two, if I'm looking at this right, there are two items that are listed here, correct? Ms. Harvey?
Correct.
Okay. And may I get a motion to sort of approve the previous minutes?
Artie, can I clarify? The agenda that I'm seeing has one set of minutes on the consent agenda that we just approved.
Is that right?
Missing something?
Maybe I'm, I think, Sean, I think I conflated a couple things. I think I appreciate you clarifying that. I think we're on to the regular order of business now, right? Yes, yes. I thank you for that, Sean. Regular order of business. The first item is approval of the 2022 quarter 2 investment report. Ms. Montoya Chico?
Yes. So the first item in our agenda is the Q2 investment report. I don't have a presentation, but the details of the investment report are in your attachment A of the agenda item. I would just highlight some quick things on the investment report. Overall, the our investments are pretty in line with the prior quarters. We really don't have all of our investments continue to be in highly rated securities comprised mainly of corporate bonds, government bonds, and of course we have our LAIF investment, which is part of the California pooled investment account. We do follow the California investment policy. So our investments tend to be very low risk, which in turn means low returns. The market has been very volatile, the last few quarters, but because we have our investments in rather low risk, there really hasn't been any adverse impact to our investments. As a result of the market volatility that I think we've all seen the past few quarters. The only impact really has been on the interest rates. The interest rates had been declining for the past several quarters. And this quarter, Q2, is actually the first time that I'm starting to see the interest rates increase. Not by a lot, but with the Federal Reserve increasing the rates, we're starting now to see the interest rates on our investments increase, and particularly LAIF. We were, for the quarter, we're at 69 basis points compared to the prior quarter, which was 29 basis points. So we are increasing. Our market value of our investment portfolio is about 104 million, and that's down from the prior quarter of about 110. But that decrease is purely due to investments maturing. It has nothing to do with being affected by the market in a negative way. So overall, our investments are generally pretty stable and pretty in line with prior quarter. So if anybody has any comments or questions, we can go to the resolution. If not,
I don't see any comments from any of the other Finance Committee members, but Ms. Montoya Chico, I do have a comment, and that is that I think you and I have had previous discussions, and you may have had some previous discussions with other members of the Finance Committee about seeing if there are some additional opportunities to diversify our investment portfolio. I know that as you just indicated, there are some restrictions, and we're pretty constrained in terms of what we can invest in and who we can invest with. But the goal would be to try to figure out if there are additional sort of entities, financial institutions, other sort of more diverse sort of banking institutions, et cetera, that we might be able to look at in terms of our investment opportunities. And just wondering how that's going and what more we might need to do in that area.
I actually would welcome input from the committee of any suggestions. I know you have said, look into potentially investing with more local banks. And I myself would welcome any suggestions that any of the committee members might have. Maybe their own entities, organizations are investing in some local bank that they can suggest for me, and we can look into it on our end. We haven't done any of that yet to date. We are going to revise our investment policy next come January, and we will incorporate, being more socially responsible, looking into diversifying. But before that happens, I would like any input from the committees if they do know of any banks that we could potentially move some of our investments to.
Okay. We will take you up on that. Can I get a motion to approve the investment report?
So moved.
Get a second?
Second.
All right, so moved by Tony, seconded by Saleg. Ms. Harvey, would you call the roll?
Broughton, Saleg,
Yes.
Tony.
Aye.
That's 2-4, none against. Motion carries.
Very good. The final item on our agenda is approval of the 2022 mid-year budget variance and projection. It's our financial statement. Ms. Montoya Chico, I think this is you again.
Yes. Yeah. So this time I do have a presentation and I will be sharing my screen. So please let me know as soon as you see it. Hopefully it shows. Do we see it?
Yes.
Okay, give me a second. Oops, I went back. Okay, so this agenda item, I'll be presenting to you the mid-year budget variance report, which I'll start with including a summary of our Q2 financial results, and then I'll go into our mid-year projections as well as our proposed budget amendment. Starting off, this is a highlight of all of, excuse me, starting off, this is a highlight of our Q2 revenue at the fund level. So I'll go over the funds that had the most significant change. I won't go through every single line item. So overall, bar wide, our operating revenues compared to actuals compared to budget are 3.4 million above budget. So that's a good thing. Of that 3.4 million, the general fund accounts for about 1.6 million higher than our budget, and that's really mainly due to mandatory fees that we earned from more attorneys paying than we had estimated. We had more attorneys paying, so in turn, we have a few more. We have more revenue in our general fund due to mandatory fees. The Equal Access Fund, as you see, it's slightly below budget by about a little bit over $1 million. And this is really due to an error that we have in the budget. There's a duplicate entry for one of our grant administrative cost reimbursements. And this is actually one of the budget amendments that I will be sharing later in my presentation. So once we correct this error, the Equal Access Fund, our actuals will be in line with our revenues. The Legal Services Trust Fund is actually higher than budget by about a little bit over $1.5 million, and that's due to larger account balances from our IOTA revenues. When we budgeted the Legal Services Trust Fund, which is primarily IOTA revenues, we had estimated to have average daily deposit balances of about 3.4 billion, but when we looked at actuals, the average daily balances are about 4.2 billion. So that means that we have larger balances, so we're getting more interest from or more revenues from those IOTA accounts. And then admissions fund is also higher than budget by a little bit over $1 million. And that really is mostly due to the February bar exam. We actually had more applicants sit for the bar exam than we had estimated. So we had more revenues. And really outside of those, these four funds, as you can see, our revenues in the other funds are pretty much at budget or very, very close to budget.
May I ask a question on that slide?
Yes, Mark.
Thank you. It looks to me that there may be a typo, and I'm going to ask you about this.
Mm-hmm.
After the column where you have June 30th, 2022, which represents 2 quarters, as you said, of the year, 50% of our fiscal year, since we start in January. I think the next column, it's probably should be labeled fiscal year 2022 budget rather than June 30th, 2021 budget. And I'm saying that by looking at the paper here. Am I mistaken? It's just a little typo there?
There is a typo. Yes, I see what you're saying. And it is, you're right. This is year to date. And I apologize for that. I do see.
It's year to date in the first column, but the second column, where it says 2021, that's actually the entire fiscal year budget for 2022.
It's 2022, correct.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. Moving on to the other side, the expenses, overall bar wide, we have our expenses actually below budget by 6.3 million. Again, of that, the general fund accounts for about 2.4 million expenses being lower than budget. And this is mainly due to 2 factors. One being personnel savings from staff vacancies that we continue to have. And the second factor is building operation expenses that we have savings in due to due to lower occupancy, as well as deferred maintenance. As we all know, we're hoping to sell the building. So where we can, we are deferring maintenance costs if possible. The admissions fund, we're also below, our expenses are below budget by about 700,000. And this is due to two factors as well. One is professional services and the other is software maintenance. On the professional services side, there is an exam preparation program for first year law students that was budgeted that will not be spent this year. So we will have those savings for the rest of the year as well. On the software maintenance savings through June 30th, that's really just the timing difference between when the Salesforce budgeted expenses incurred. We will incur that expense in the second half of the year, but as of June 30th for the first half, we had savings there. And then the client security fund, we're well below budget in our expenses by about $2.7 million. And this is really mostly due to claims in our case inventory that are deemed ineligible for payment. So that actually results in lower payouts than we had originally budgeted. So that's our financial statement summary. Are there any questions before I move on to the next subset item in this agenda? No, hearing, seeing none. The next item included is the mid-year budget to variance analysis report. So this report is a variance where we summarize all of our variances by comparing actual operating results to our budgeted amounts for the 6 months ended June 30th. And this is in accordance with the board book. We consider significant variances at the cost center line item, and that's anything that's plus or minus 100,000. So there's a lot of variances that we've documented. Those are detailed in your attachment C. I won't go in through every line into those details in my presentation, but if anybody has any questions on any of the variances that we've documented in your attachment C, I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, you'll see there's a lot in there, and I won't go through every single one of those variance explanations. I'm going to move on to the mid-year projections. So the mid-year projections are at the fund level. What I have here in the slide, the blue columns are what are our annual budgeted / amended revenues and expenses. And we also are, I'm also presenting for you the projected revenues and expenses. Now our projections are based on the actual 6 month results. And then we take the remaining 6 months estimates to come up with our full 2022 projections. So as you can see, overall, we are projecting a state bar-wide deficit for 2022 of $17 million, a little bit over 17 million. And that is a decrease from what we had budgeted initially. So that's a positive change. Yes, we are still projecting a deficit, but the deficit is smaller than we had initially budgeted. Part of the board reserve policy states that the reserve levels for all of the funds should be between 17 and 30%. As you can see, there's 3 funds here, General Fund, Admissions Fund, and Elimination of Bias Funds, that are falling below the 17% floor. The ones that are highlighted in gray that I have in A, those are the funds that are excluded from the reserve target reserve policy. Per our policy, we do have primarily the grant-related funds that get excluded. So for admissions, I think you guys will recall we adopted the budget. Admissions was budgeted to have a significant structural deficit. The good thing for 2022, there's sufficient reserves to be able to absorb that structural deficit, but in future years, there won't be enough reserves to actually absorb any ongoing deficits in admissions, which is why we took on the task of reviewing the fees this year. And this is why we're, obviously evaluating all of the admissions fees to be able to hopefully increase the fees and be able to support the cost of all of the programs and bring the admissions deficit down significantly, if not at least ideally break even, but if not, bring the deficit significantly. The next fund, elimination of bias, we've talked about this before. So the elimination of bias fund is a fee that used to be prior to 2018, $5. After 2018, it was reduced to $2. So obviously for the past several years, we've had a revenue decline. However, our DEI work, which is what encompasses elimination of bias, currently has increased. So, the revenue streams are just going to be insufficient to support the cause. And as you can see, we're projecting to run out of reserves for this fund. What does that mean? That the general fund is going to have to support the activities in this fund. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a comment on this. So
Yes.
this is when I read this, and you and I have discussed this,
Mm-hmm.
Araceli, because I want to let you know that this was a concern of mine.
Mm-hmm.
If the legislature cut the revenue, I think that means we got to cut the expenses. So I'm a little confused as to why this says ongoing activities need to be funded from the general fund, which has a deficit. So the way I look at this is I would argue and expect in our next 2023 budget that we reduce the expenses until such time that the legislature sees fit to make this a priority.
Okay, so I just want to provide a little background here that I don't think Araceli is really aware of, but the Elimination of Bias Fund used to be the Elimination of Bias / Bar Relations Fund, and at that time, it was funded through a $5 fee and voluntary fee. In 2017, the bar did not have a fee bill, and we needed to petition the court. The court petition occurred in 2016, Supreme Court, for authorization to assess licensing fees for attorneys. What the Supreme Court approved in terms of fees that could be assessed by the bar was the elimination of bias fee, a fee to support elimination of bias, but not a fee to support bar relations. In 2018, when the board adopted its budget, the board voluntarily continued on only with the elimination of bias portion of the fee, not the bar relations portion. And the reason that it did that was that the sections had separated off from the state bar, and the bar relations functions of the bar went with the sections to the California Lawyers Association. There had never been a formal split within the state bar's budget between elimination of bias and bar relations activities. But obviously, if you have a $5 fee and you're going to split it, it's roughly commensurate. You're going to have 3 and 2 one way or the other. Based on, there's a board agenda item on this, but based on the programming that was in place at the time in the elimination of bias program and changes that were coming at that juncture, the elimination of bias activity was very focused on judicial diversity and judicial pipeline work. And there was a lot of traveling and going out to try to increase diversity of the bench. As we transition this organization to focus more on attorney diversity, there's a determination that the programming would change. So as a result of that, in 2018, the board made the decision that $2 would be the fee associated with the elimination of bias activities, understanding that we could not charge the full $5 in any event because the entire bar relations function had gone off to the California Lawyers Association. So I want to make it clear that the legislature did not cut the 5 to 2. The legislature did direct the separation of the sections and the segregation of sort of trade association activities. Then every other year, the state bar is required to provide a report to the legislature on our activities to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the profession. We most recently did that in 2021. In that report, we documented additional funding needs related to our DEI work. We said we basically needed another $450,000. We did that in March 2021. Also, this year in the board's approved legislative priorities packet, which you approved earlier this year, I can't quite remember the month, there was a specific affirmative ledge priority that we did advance related to increasing funding for elimination of bias. That obviously did not make it into the fee bill. So it is accurate to say that we have, one, understood our statutory mission to include increasing diversity, equity, inclusion in the profession. That is in our statutory mission. Two, we have been identifying the funding needs we have that are not covered by the $2 fee to the legislature, both via that biannual report and in an affirmative ledge proposal. And three, they have not funded that. They haven't been responsive to our request for additional funding. So that would be fair to say, but not that they cut the $5.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much for that explanation. I only read what's on the paper, and I made an incorrect assumption when it said it was cut. That was my mistake. Thank you for clarifying. My general point, though, stands, which is that if we've got a fund that's running a deficit, we have two choices: increase the revenue or cut the expenses. I don't like seeing, we'll just, fund it through the general fund and that's end of story. I don't think that's fiduciary responsibility.
Okay.
Leah, can I ask just one sort of clarifying question on your comments? And I appreciate you giving us a little bit of the history here. So is the elimination of bias fund, is it still focused on diversity in the judiciary? Because obviously the workload has gone up, as Araceli has indicated, or is it in the profession in general now? And that's the reason for the uptick.
It's in the profession. It's not focused on diversity of the bench. We've done a lot of work to clarify sort of who in our lane, and the Judicial Council is very focused on diversity in the bench. And our role, and this was through board adopted policy as reflected in our last strategic plan, is focusing on the diversity of the profession. So that funding does support that work. The diversity report card that was recently published is an example of what's funded through that, the diversity summits that we hold, a number of different activities. Right, so hopefully that answers your question.
It does, I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments? I'll move through no? Okay. So really quick, I wanted to just provide some highlights on the projections to some of the funds. I won't go through all of them, but and this is our projections, right, compared to budget, and why the change. And as I've mentioned, you've heard these in my presentation earlier. In the general fund, the revenues are higher because we have a slightly higher we received slightly higher mandatory fees from more attorneys paying. And the projected savings in the general fund is primarily due to staff vacancies. And the admissions fund revenues are higher just because we have primarily those February exam fees where we we had more applicants than we had estimated. And then similar savings on the expense side for admissions, from those programs that will not be spent. Similar explanation for the client security fund. Our projections were below budget. Above budget for the client security fund. Again, from mandatory fees that do fund the client security fund, and significant savings in the client security fund projected expenses compared to the adopted budget, because there's a high level of claims that are deemed ineligible for payment, so lower payouts. And in the legal services trust fund, it's those IOLTA deposits that are larger than we had estimated, which is what drove our projections to be higher than the budget. And the expenses are actually pretty in line with the budget, so there isn't too much change there. And the last item in this agenda is the proposed budget amendment. So these are the 5 budget amendments that I am proposing to get approval. The first three items are corrections. You heard me say earlier that there's a couple where we had some errors, so correcting these will align our actuals to the budget better. The last 2 items 1D and 2A, one of the things we do in our mid-year projections is we see where we need to adjust revenues or expenses based on the actual, and items 1D and 2A are a result of our assessing our mid-year projections. We need to decrease revenues in these last 2 items to get closer to the our actuals, and correct and get closer to our actuals going forward. So I won't go through all of the details here. the explanations are provided here. So if anybody has any comments or questions on the budget amendments, otherwise we can move to the resolution.
I don't see any comments or questions. Am I? Just want to make sure. You want to proceed to the resolution? So the resolution would approve the mid-year budget variance report. And I would just, this isn't a part of the resolution, but I would make note of the fact that as we look at our legislative sort of agenda for next year, and as we begin the process of adopting next year's budget, and we'll do this also with the fee analysis, that take Mr. Tony's comments to heart relative to sort of workload, revenue, et cetera, et cetera. May I have a motion to approve the mid-year budget variance report?
I move adoption of the resolution.
Second.
So moved by Mr. Saleg, adopted by seconded by Mr. Tony. Ms. Harvey?
Broughton, Saleg,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
Aye.
2 for, none against, motion carries.
Very good. I believe that concludes the work of the Finance Committee today. Am I correct with that?
Yes.
Very good. So the Finance Committee will stand adjourned, and I think the Audit Committee is set to follow. And to be, I don't know if Ms. Shelby's in the room, but is that Leah, would that be a noon start, or how do we want to do that?
Trustee Shelby, do you have a preference? If you want to start now or audit committee? Oh, okay. Do you want to start now? Do you want to take a 5-minute break or? Let's just go ahead and move to audit.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you, Finance Committee members.